Okay, so let's move on to nervous tissue. Again, if you remember all the way back to chapter 4, the four types of tissues or four categories. So epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue, we spent the exam 2 on that. And now we're finally at nervous tissues. So now we're finally at covering at least all four types of tissues. Not all the organ systems, but we have covered all four types of tissues. Now, the thing is that what are the nervous system? What does the nervous system do? Why do we have it? Why is it so important? Well, here are the main tight categories of the functions of the nervous system. So you have sensory functions. So basically, this is if you know like things like tech or computer science. So this is your input. So what are you receiving from your environment? And it's not just like the environment you see around you. It's also your internal environment. Now, the thing is that you're not going to be able to think like, oh, the pH in my stomach is currently 1.2. You don't get that kind of input, but your brain is able to detect some sort of like internal environment and also sensory information from inside your body. You're not necessarily conscious of it, but you're getting all these signals, all this information from the outside and your own body as well. So this is what we call stimuli. So our stimulus is a singular. Stimuli refers to multiple stimulus, or yeah, when you have multiple stimuluses, it's a stimuli. So these are changes or events in the environment that trigger some sort of activity in a neuron. So sensory neurons, and sometimes they're called receptors. Now, this is where it gets a little confusing. We're talking about cell receptors or cells that act as receptors versus protein receptors, which are proteins on cells that detect things. So again, sensory means that you're detecting something. Then you have integrative functions. These are processing and thinking. So you can detect something. And the thing is that you're getting all these signals from your environment. Like you're detecting the light that's not only from your screen right now, but also in your environment, in the sunlight, if you have a window open. You're also detecting the temperature, the pressure of your seat, your clothes on your body, but are you necessarily thinking about it? So this is the processing and thinking. I mean, you're getting all the stimuli, but what is your nervous system going to do about it? What is it going to perceive about it? You're not necessarily responding to all the senses and stimuli you have right now. And then you have motor or your output. So these are responses. Okay, so now you've kind of like got all these signals from your external environment or your internal environment. Like say you're hungry, you're like, am I hungry? Am I really hungry? And if your motor output, maybe you want to make a sandwich. So or maybe you want to go out to eat or make something to eat. So or just eat general. So then you would do the movement and then you go there and then you do and address that issue. So motor is a response to all this sensory input and this processing and thinking that makes sense of all this sensory input. So this is actually what you actually do in response to all the senses, both internal and external, and all the thoughts, conscious and subconscious that you do with that input. Okay, so this is a cartoon of a neuron. So these are the basic functional unit of the nervous system. So these are actually what carry out the tasks and what the actual abilities of the nervous system. So, but is your nervous system not just neurons? Hopefully we talk about neuroglia at the end of this lecture, but neurons are the ones that actually carry signals. They're the ones that detect the signals, they're the ones that process it, and they're the ones that carry it out and how you interact with your environment and respond. And they're different, just like you have your own anatomy and other cells have their anatomy, so do neurons. What we have here are dendrite, cell body, axon, and of course every cell, or actually most cells have nuclei. We haven't covered the special cases yet. That's more, I think we cover that next semester. But yes, your neurons, they all have nuclei and they have something called these new terms, dendrites. So the thing is that we have dendrites, axons, cell bodies, and this is how your neuron, a typical neuron, detects signals. Now, here we have incoming signals, also known as stimuli, and they detect it via these structures called dendrites. And notice that on this neuron, there are multiple dendrites. Now, some neurons may only have one dendrite. Some might have multiple dendrites like this, but dendrites are the part of a neuron that detect signals, these stimuli. And then the cell body, this is kind of where the processing occurs, and this is where it kind of determines, okay, do I want to carry out this signal? Do I want to carry out to other neurons? So the cell body here kind of does all that, and there might be other neurons that are sending signals to the cell body as well. But typically, in a typical neuron pathway, you have dendrites receiving signals, and it gets processed through the cell body. And then if this neuron decides to send another signal to other neurons or other cells, then it sends it, or perikaryon. Don't worry too much about that for this class. And you have a nucleus. So it might send, remember those action potentials, those electrochemical signals I talked about when we talked about the neuromuscular junction? So these are action potentials. There are signals that involve chemicals and ions and electricity, and they send it along this structure called an axon. So this long thing that projects in this neuron, this is an axon. This carries out these action potentials, and then it branches into these branches called telodendria. Telodendron for singular, but yeah, these are telodendria. And then they end in something called, this might sound familiar, axon terminals. So axon terminals are these ends right here. Now here's the central nervous system. And actually this is a warning about, so this is where, if you have the Martini book, this is where the Martini books really starts to, or actually OpenStax and Martini really start to kind of veer off and go in different directions. So I might continue to use a scaffolding based on the, because this is again one of the weird parts of OpenStax. It has like a lot of like, it starts off with some very basic terms and very not too many details. And then at the end of the nervous system, it starts with the neurological exam. So it kind of goes like, yeah, it starts from very simple, and then all of a sudden you're talking about clinical stuff. And I'm like, whoa, this is kind of a big jump. And the Martini and OpenStax organizes the nervous system very, very differently. So I'll try my best to help everyone using OpenStax and make sense of it. I think OpenStax is a little, I shouldn't say it's weaker, but they both have their strengths and weaknesses and different ways of teaching the nervous system. So that's what I'm getting at. If you're studying from both at the same time, it does kind of jump around. Depending which is your primary source, it does jump around a lot with the other. So central nervous system, you have the brain, and everyone knows the brain, and then you also have the spinal cord, and this is your entire central nervous system. That's all. That's all it is, brain and spinal cord. And no, really, I'm really serious. This is just your central nervous system. Now, is this your entire nervous system? Nope. So there's another part of the nervous system, and this is your peripheral nervous system. So when you have like something on the peripheral, something extra on the side, I mean, it's still important. It's not like it's not necessary, but central nervous system, these are the main processing centers, peripheral nervous system. Now, this contains all those sensory neurons and all those motor neurons. So the ones that detect the outside and inside environment, but also the one that carry out effects and that carry out responses, such as muscle contractions or sometimes organ functions, glandular functions. So pretty much everything else but the brain and spinal cord. That's what the peripheral nervous system is. So all other nerves, everything that's not part of the brain and spinal cord. So these are branches off from the central nervous system to the rest of the body. So they both carry signals to the central nervous system, but also carry signals away from the central nervous system. So it is still very important.